Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, Season 1, Episode 7. So, a little bit of rebuttal, and we'll go into talk about, of course, what happens in this episode, if there was things that happened. Uh, so, Jen was to go on and walk the dog in the wedding. So there technically was a wedding, but you could barely have seen it. Titania was to go on and to admit that she was trying to ruin of course, a moment where Jen was to actually feel good about herself and be a part of this wedding. We also have Book and Nikki, who were to find this website of She-Hulk haters who are to list death threats, and it seems that at some point She-Hulk looks into it via this episode, and it's to say, it's like, well, hey, if any of these guys were to have gone on to say any of this stuff to me to my face, like, it would have just been Hulk smash, and yeah, like, more than likely I can go on and say that if anybody's to go on and hate this show, I'm sure a number of people who all worked on it will be like, well, but the check's cleared, right? We got paid this week, right? Because this week, of course, is no different. We, of course, this week, honestly, this show can't be bothered with giving us a good episode. Like, really, the only takeaway from this episode is that there's actually Marvel characters being used in a Marvel show. Wow! Isn't that unique? Instead of just going on and creating some original characters for the show, they actually took quite a few characters from the actual comic books to be put into this episode. And I was like, wow, like that has to be like the lowest of low of praise, but still, at least it's something. So with this episode, what ends up going on? So come to find out, the title of this episode is be called Retreat. And so we of course have Jen, who is to not only have a boyfriend, it seems, with Josh. We then have, of course, Jen needing to go on and deal with Blonsky, it seems, in this episode, because we end up finding out that Blonsky is to possibly break his parole. And so Jen goes on to go along with this uh, detective, I think his name is Chuck, to go on and investigate whether or not that Blonsky is trying to break his parole. And come to find out, that leads Jennifer to go on to realize that Blonsky is to try and therapize a number of different other Marvel characters, as well as also trying to get certain characters to change their ways. So, even to the point of us getting to, of course, see Wrecker again, which, of course, was to have been the Wrecking Crew. And it was kind of funny because they had to remind us who this character was, because it's been X number of weeks since we last seen this character, so we needed a recapping, because there was no way that we could remember a character like this being used in this show, because heaven forbid you actually have a character consistently used on a show instead of just kind of sporadically whenever the F you want to just use certain things. So, per that, like, really, that's what's all going on in this episode. So basically, this episode has nothing going on. This is to probably be the worst She-Hulk episode, but overall, this should not be surprising whatsoever. I think a lot of people are kind of waiting for the Daredevil episode to become a thing, and I don't think that that's going to happen until the very last episode. So, for those of you that are kind of holding out hope that the next week's episode is actually going to be the Daredevil episode, I'm assuming it's not going to be until the very end of the season. Because they just want to milk that for all it's worth, right? To tick people off. So, because they have nothing as far as content that they can actually put onto this show, so they're just coming up with all these random, stupid crap things to waste our time. And then finally, they'll give us something by the end that we actually wanted this whole entire time. Because that's what happened with Falcon and Winter Soldier, where it's like, okay, we'll give him the suit for Captain America, but he won't actually use it until the season finale. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just go on to Double Five Time territory. I think it's about that time to just go into this episode, because it's spoiler time, it's about that time to spoil this episode. So, in the very beginning of this episode, we go on to have Jen and Josh, and they're consistently going out, consistently dating, and it seems like we have this romance that these characters are to be like, well, hey, what are you doing this day? Hey, what are you doing that day? They're consistently texting one another. She-Hulk is to respond and have them go and consistently be together. So we have Josh, it seems, who is getting closer and closer to kissing Jennifer, but then it seems she ends up pulling the ripcord in the last moment. She's like, no, not yet. But then we, of course, have Jen, who is to go on 3 dates with Josh, and finally they end up sleeping together. And so for Jennifer, it seems that all is going well until all of a sudden we then have Josh, who has stopped texting Jennifer. And a couple of days have passed, and Jen is like, oh my god, like, he hasn't texted me. And so all of a sudden Jennifer is to be getting concerned. She's consistently, like, buffering her texts and so on and so forth, hoping that this guy will at some point call. And wouldn't you know it, instead, we have Chuck, Blonsky's parole officer, who is stating, like, well, hey, like, it seems that something was to happen, and Blonsky might have gone on and got out of his ankle bracelet. So Chuck, of course, asking She-Hulk to come with him, because if he is to go there and he may be in trouble, we, of course, want to have Chuck, who has a Hulk or She-Hulk around, to help kind of put Abomination in his place. So Jen agrees. So Jen makes her way to Blonsky's place, and immediately we have Blonsky, who ends up telling the guys the truth, that it seems that at some point he was to walk through this electric fence, and that's what shorted out his monitor bracelet. But Abomination is to still be no more. And Chuck is like, well, okay, that sounds reasonable. Like, let's just kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. So Chuck leaves after realizing that Blonsky is still under control. So as we have Jennifer leaving, we all of a sudden have these two characters that are battling it out. We have both Man Bull and El Agula. Agula? Come to find out, Man Bull is to supposedly be a Daredevil villain. But I'm assuming I'm hoping at some point these characters were actually all tied to the She-Hulk comic book, because I think one of the characters at some point were in like the sensational She-Hulk stuff. So I'm assuming or I'm hoping at one point that every number of these were to actually be legitimately She-Hulk villains or whatever. But so Man Thing and El Agula, who seems to mention that he is to want to be a swashbuckler, and that it seems that more and more that people are to think that he is to be like a matador. So we have these two characters fighting it out, and we have Jennifer's car that ends up getting wrecked in the process, this Prius. So now it seems that Jennifer is now stuck in this location, and she, of course, is to want to go on and get bars for her cell phone. And so Jennifer just continues to walk until she can hopefully find bars. And coincidentally, She-Hulk ends up getting these bars, or Jennifer ends up getting these bars in this area where Blonsky and all of his men are all coming together to have a meeting where they're going to, at some point, just kind of talk things out. So we come to find out that beyond the characters that we have already seen in this episode, we see two other characters that are fairly unique, but also are comic book characters. We, of course, have a character called Porcupine that is only here to at some point demask himself, and then they realize because of the smell that this porcupine has, because he might not have taken off this costume very often, they tell him to like kind of put back on the costume because of how much it smells. So Porcupine, it seems, I think, has had a cluster of different wide varieties of villains. Excuse me, in Marvel Comics. I think he's gone on to do like Defenders and Avengers and all kinds of other things. So either way, for him to go up against She-Hulk is like, okay, well, like he's gone up against everyone else. And we do have a character called Suracell, uh, and this, of course, is a character who I guess was a Punisher villain. This character is to also be said in this episode to love blood, as if he is some kind of vampire or something. Like, they didn't go into exact specifics about it, but anyways. So we have uh, 4 characters, and if you count Blodsky, 5, who are all in this meeting, and they are talking things out. And so She-Hulk goes on, and she's like, "Well, I'm like, I guess I'll go on and I'll join you guys." As Blonsky is to ask Jennifer, it's like, "Well, like, man, are you really glued to that cell phone? Like, how about you just kind of come over here and like let me try and help you. Let me try to like um, kind of figure out a way to uh, like boost you up." So we have Jennifer at some point who is to realize, as it finally gets to her turn, that she is to hate those girls who are all perfect at one point, and so it seems Jennifer is to finally go on and realize that she at any time can become one of those women, and so it's all about like an image thing for Jennifer. And so all the villains are to go on and say it's like, well, hey, like we like appreciate you just being like just regular Jennifer. It's like, how about you just kind of power down from being She-Hulk and just kind of just show us your other side, and like we can all accept that. So Jennifer does go on to do that, and as she is to feel comfortable, and we then have everyone going like, yeah, like great. So we have Wrecker who ends up coming in and is to try to be a part of this meeting, and Jennifer's like, "Oh my god, like we have to go on and do a recapping of who this guy is." And so all of a sudden we end up having Wrecker, who of course was a part of the Wrecking Crew, and so now we end up kind of assessing that this guy was to reform, that he doesn't want to go on and hurt people anymore, and he realized what a mistake it was for him to go on and do what he was doing. So now we, of course, go on and have Jennifer, who is to start to feel more comfortable around Blonsky and everyone else. And so she then turns around and is to go on into this kind of sauna like thing, this house that Blonsky has prepared for people, and Jennifer takes that. But then also, like, Jennifer is to talk about her text with Josh, and Jennifer is to mention that it's been a long time since Josh had texted her back, and she's getting kind of concerned. So come to find out, the whole reason for that is that Josh is to be a villain here. So what ends up happening in this episode is we had Jennifer that after those 3 days, we of course had Josh, who is trying to go on and try to get the blood from She-Hulk, because he is, of course, tied to the Wrecking Crew, and like great, like so. At least that's some kind of continuation of the story. But anyways, we we have Josh, and he ends up letting everybody know via this text of what he's doing. So really, by the end of the episode, that is like the last real thing that we end up seeing, and it's like, wow, what a waste of time that was. But we also had Porcupine, who was to reveal his face, just for them to realize that the Porcupine costume is not clean enough. It's kind of smelly, and so they end up wanting him to put the costume back on. But other than that, I think that covers most of this episode. Very uneventful, not a lot of things going on in this one. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that you liked about this episode or hated or whichever. Just kind of let me know how you feel about this episode if you were to have gone on and watched it, or just kind of listened to me, said like, yeah, this episode sounded really garbage. The worst She-Hulk episode ever. Even if you can go on and say it's like, well, yeah, but it tied in so many things, and it went this way and it went this direction. It's like, well, that's great and all, but still, like, this show, like, has not gotten better, it's gotten worse. So anyways, I think that technically covers everything. I'm gonna go on and get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.